was Charlene Moran's brainchild to have our new neighbor, Kitty Burns Florey, come to talk to us about her books. And we're really thrilled that she agreed to come today. Kitty is a veteran editor as well as a writer. She is the author of 13 novels, 2 works of nonfiction, and many essays and short stories. Her book, Sister Bernadette's Barking Dog, a memoir with sentence diagramming, was called A Pleasantly Discursive and Affectionate Tribute to an Antiquated Art by the Wall Street Journal. This was followed by Script and Scribble, The Rise and Fall of Handwriting. Both books were Amazon bestsellers. A native of Syracuse, Kitty went to college in Boston, lived for 12 years in Brooklyn, but spent much of her life in New Haven. Since 2012, she has been happily settled in Amherst, where her novel Amity Street was written as a kind of tribute to a town she has come to love. Please welcome Kitty Burns Florey.
The noise is the speaker because people are moving and there's a wall in the way. It's antiquated. It's just an old machine.
You want me to move the speaker?
No.
Turn it off. I will talk loud.
Talk loud. Can you?
I will do my best to talk loud.
That's not loud enough.
Not loud enough, okay, I'll talk very well.
Well,
I have
we
a
can
rasp
move
in
the
my
speaker.
voice. I have to frighten people to come. Well, we'll see how it goes. I really will try to talk very well. So, I'm really happy to be here at the Women's Club, and I'm happy to thank you, Charlene, for inviting me. I'm not a member, but I'm very interested in what you do. And I'm glad to be talking about my book, Amity Street, which is, as some of you may know, maybe not very many, but some of you may know that it's a spin-off from a previous book called The Writing Master, which takes place in 1856. Amity Street advances 35 years and is a kind of sequel to The Writing Master. The Writing Master, in turn,
It's not loud enough.
it's not loud enough.
It's not loud enough.
Now let's see if we can
Maybe
do
you should
this.
come closer.
See if it works.
The problem is people moving. It is, and I will turn it on. Can you hear? Can you hear if I turn it on?
Yeah.
Is this making noise through the speaker? No, I can't hear it that way.
No, it's on. I heard
It's
you,
on.
Catherine.
Yeah, you can hear it.
I'll be here. I did hear you.
Okay, well, the problem is you can't move around and you have to kiss it. Yes. These things, this is an old guy. We need to do something about it.
Yeah, there's Joni Frazier's researching this, so that we can buy a new one.
Is this audible? Is this making a difference? In the back?
That was you.
That's because she was moving.
Must be my
Oh.
key.
All right, I will try not to move. and-
That's better, better.
It's better, okay.
Yeah.
Amity Street is a spin-off from The Writing Master, my previous historical novel. I've written a lot of novels, but these are the 2 historical novels. And The Writing Master is a spin-off from my nonfiction book called Script and Scribble, The Rise and Fall of Handwriting. And it includes a history of handwriting, and especially in this country, where
Oh, this is just, I'm pretty sure it's
I will talk
the
very loud.
age.
Loudly, rather.
Okay.
Maybe you could also talk a little bit slower. Closer.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so move you a little closer, okay.
Can you,
I'm
that's it.
gonna just
Turn it off that
and I'm
way.
gonna move you just a bit closer, if
Yes,
that's okay?
Sure, anything would help.
Here.
A writing master
Much better.
was, really? Okay.
Yeah.
How about in the back? Everything okay? Okay. A writing master in times when everybody was not literate, and even if they could read, they often couldn't write. People were sometimes taught to read women were taught to read, but writing was discouraged because that could lead to communicating things that maybe some people did not want communicated. Slaves in America sometimes knew how to read so that they could read the Bible, but if they knew how to write, they could communicate with each other and perhaps plan escapes, etc. So literacy was confined for a long time, except for really educated classes and mostly men, was confined to just reading and not writing. So if you wanted to write a letter, you could there'd be an itinerant writing master who would go from town to town and set up shop in the writing master. He sets up shop on the New Haven Green, and people could come. I have to write a letter to my grandmother, and I'll dictate it, and he would do it and provide an envelope and a stamp or however that it would, and you would pay him 25 cents or whatever it was, and that was really common. So after I wrote Script and Scribble, my publicist and my daughter both said, you should write a novel about a writing master, that's so interesting. So I did, and it was this, and then when I moved, and soon after this was done, I moved up here to Amherst, and I thought, well, it might be interesting to bring my characters up here for a sequel. So it's 35 years later, so some of them are dead, some of them were babies and they've grown up, some of them have gotten married, and some of them have had other adventures. But I set it on Amity Street. A lot of it takes place in a house on Amity Street. And a woman who was a little baby who in the writing master is now grown up, and she lived in Italy and has come back to the States to find her roots, which are quite tangled and mysterious, and it's a huge revelation to her when she finds out where she actually comes from. So in order to do that, she has to come from Rome to New York to New Haven to Amherst, and so she's one of the main characters in this book. So one of the characters I like best in Amity Street is a young woman. Well, she was a young woman in the writing master. She's now a middle-aged widow. She was married to the writing master, who has now departed. And she and her daughter, Hazel, live in a house on Amity Street. And I don't know who lives there, but it's that little white house as you go down Amity Street on the right if you're going toward Hadley. Just an adorable house. So I have just usurped that house and put my people in it. I've also usurped a couple of other houses in Amherst. Some friends of mine who live on South Pleasant Street, I used their house and built a little cabin behind it for the purposes of the book. So this character, Maud, who is a minor character in Amity Street, and she's not one in the writing master, and is not one of the major characters in Amity Street, but she's important, and she appears quite often. The reason that I want to point her out to you is that, I didn't intend to do any reading, but I'll just read you this little bit because I think you can relate to it. This is 1892, and well, first I'll introduce Maud. So Anna is the woman from Italy who comes up here to find out about her life story. She has been a singer, and she's no longer a singer for reasons that I would not reveal. She was an opera singer. And so she is introduced to various people. So she goes with Maud's brother George, who also lives with Maud and Hazel. I'm sure this is very confusing, but it doesn't really matter. George takes her over to Maud's so that she's got information that Anna needs. And I'll just read a little bit as an introduction. Maud met them at the door, an aging beauty with untamed graying hair and George's brilliant blue eyes. She was wearing a divided skirt. The only practical choice for bicycling, she said, and put her hands in her pockets to spread out a rather startling pattern of green and violet, which were the colors of the suffragist movement. Anna knew nothing about the movement, least of all that it had its own unfortunate colors, but she admired the logic of the skirt. Maud promised to give her a pamphlet on the rational dress movement. I could teach you to ride a bicycle if you were interested. I must confess, Mrs. Cooper, that I have never seen a woman ride a bicycle. Not even in Rome, Italy? That does surprise me. Well, wait until you have been in Amherst for a while. There are quite a number of us, and more every day. George snickered At last count, there were exactly 4. You may well laugh, George. The rumor is that Ted Page had a livery stable where now the Amherst Cinema is, and that whole complex, there was a big thriving livery stable. Ted Page is going to start a line of women's bicycles at the stables, and who knows, Anna may be his first customer. She broke off to ask impulsively, I hope I may call you Anna and you will call me Maud, leaving off the signorina and the Mrs. I'm thinking lately that the world doesn't gain from so much needless formality. So you can see that Maud is kind of a free spirit in an age where there were not that many visits free spirits. But then later in the book, this is the part that I think that you will be intrigued by. Anna, one of our heroines, had begun taking walks with Maud, who told her about the plans to open a women's club in the town as a kind of refuge for women who needed one. Anna asked, a refuge from what? Maud replied with spirit, from the cares of their lives, the tyranny of their husbands, the demands of their children, the oppression of simply being a woman in a world where men make all the decisions. Anna could see that she would have to form an opinion about the question of votes for women. Maud was keen to convert her, and she felt ready to be converted. The experience of oppression and tyranny was not alien to her, though she had never looked at her life that way. There was much to think about. But Maud, in her zeal, could become oppressive after a few turns around the common. She had little of what was called small talk. Hers was mostly big talk, intended to bounce off almost any subject back to the issue of rights for women. She had given Anna a rational dress pamphlet with a picture on the front of an angular woman in pants and a loose jacket, hair bobbed to her chin. Maud had a particular interest in short hair. She swept off her hat, a sensible straw with a flat brim, from which her own hair escaped in curly tendrils. Can you imagine how free we would feel, Anna, without this daily burden? We were just talking about long hair. Anna said she could indeed, and in truth, the thought of having hair as short as Davy's or George's or the postman's was not unappealing. The day of liberation would come, Maud said, and she would be first in line at the barber shop. Meanwhile, there was her friend Ida, whose solution was to wear a turban except on the hottest days. Cut it off or cover it up, Maud said. And when they passed the bonnet shop, with its window full of large, flowery chapeaux, very much like the one Anna had pinned down for the walk, Maud turned her head away as if from a scene of torture. So that, and then Mabel Loomis Todd makes a couple of cameo appearances, and the teapot on the cover belonged to Mabel. She makes a couple of cameo appearances, and so does Austin Dickinson, Emily's brother, and Mabel's, and I guess we all know about Austin. So I really tried to get into what 1892 was like in Amherst. It was, a sort of struggle between the old time ways, and of course Amherst is a very traditional, and was in many ways in a traditional community, not so much now, but then for sure. And but things were changing. And some of the things that I discovered as I was researching this, in addition to having to research the rational dress program, which I think is fascinating, that, when you read novels set in Victorian times, or any early times, but especially in the 19th century when things were changing, you don't hear women talk in the novels about how hot they are, or how their bottoms of their dresses are so filthy, or how hard it is to do the washing when you're washing these enormous yards and yards and yards of skirts, and then the petticoats and the crinolines and the hoops, the wire, and that, not even to mention the corseting, which we all know was, I made a note of the idea of women's fashion was to sculpt women's bodies into idealized forms. One doctor said that more than half of his patients were ignorant women whose bodies had been deformed by their corsets. So a movement was just beginning to end tight lacing, and some women began to wear modified corsets, and some stopped wearing corsets. Maud is one. Anna, of course, is still very tightly laced, and she's come to America without her maid, so it's really hard for her to get into her clothes. The movement began with the concept of a house dress, which was lighter, simpler, shorter, easily washable, so that the mud and germs and the general unsanitariness could be washed away. This is obviously about upper and middle class women. Poor women were not, they had other concerns than the length of their skirts, etc. Eventually, divided skirts came into being, and bicycle suits with pantaloons were designed as more women began to ride, and bicycling movement was getting quite popular around the time of Maud and her bicycle. So the research into rational dress and women's fashions and various constricting garments that they had to wear, in addition to that, for this book, I mean, it was a long time ago, 1892, even though it's only like a century and a half. It's not like I'm researching the Middle Ages or something, but I had to look up a lot of stuff about, well, some of this is not about the historical side of it, but I learned a lot about singing and voice training because of this failed opera singer. Progressive sheep farming, because there's a sheep farmer in Hadley in this book. Stamps and postage. If you posted a letter, I didn't know how much it would cost to send a letter to, from here to, I think it was to New Haven. But I have a friend who's a postage buff, so he was able to give me a lot of information about that. It's amazing what you can't find on the internet, just these little picky details. I didn't need to have them, but probably because I'm an editor as well as a writer, I like to verify everything. And the Montgomery Ward catalog had just come into being, so that plays a part in the book, and also college baseball, because there's an Amherst College versus, I think they're playing Williams, but I'm not positive, I think so. There's a game in the course of the book. And also, unfortunately, diseases like malaria and tuberculosis, which were extremely common in those days. So I published this 6 years ago, so I've obviously forgotten a lot of my research, but when it's time to ask questions, which you can do anytime, you might want to ask about some of that stuff. In the writing master, there's also a little thing that I will read, which relates to what we're talking about here. It's 4th of July, this is 1856, so we're going back 35 years. The heroine of this book, who is the woman, Anna, the ex-singer who was raised in Italy, in Amity Street, is this baby in the writing master, and this is her mother, who is going out on the 4th of July to look at the parade and the crowds going down Chapel Street in New Haven. And a wagon went by bearing a grim-looking woman with a wooden axe who was pretending to chop down a saloon under a sign that read, "'Tis now we pledge eternal hate to all that can intoxicate." Because the temperance movement was huge, and the thinking was, brilliant thinking, that if you kept the men out of the bars, women wouldn't need the vote. Because, whatever. A group of men and women dressed in heavy mourning were pretending to weep into large black handkerchiefs as they followed a gravestone on wheels marked Independence. The backs of their coats said Connecticut Abolitionist Society. So obviously abolitionism was another big thing. I wondered, this is from Anna's mother's point of view, I wondered if such things had any effect on people, if a woman with an axe or people looking funereal in black would draw anyone to their cause. A man called out, "Hey, you old battle axe," to the temperance woman, making several people laugh. And two women standing near me looked at the abolitionists and said, "How warm they must be, and imagine doing that on such a day." So this was really in the air even in the 1850s, and by the 1890s things were getting, much more, people were much more conscious of things that are obvious to us or to most of us, women's rights and votes for women and all the things that go with it. In 1892, Amherst had a population of 4,500 people, which is about 33,000 fewer than today, or around there someplace. So lots of people knew lots of people. So this is the people in this book all tend to mix and mingle and know each other and intermarry and, you know, and gossip about each other. So that was useful to me because as a novelist I needed to have them be doing that. So that's one way to impart information, is to have two characters talk about something, you know, without having to just say this happened and then this happened. A number of actual sites in Amherst are either mentioned or are part of the story. The Amherst House Hotel, which used to be where the Bank of America is, plays a big role in it. It's where Anna is staying when she comes up from New Haven and is here to do some research. The hotel was Amherst's best. Among other illustrious people, Harriet Beecher Stowe has stayed there. It was rebuilt after it burned down in a spectacular fire in 1879, and as I'm sure a lot of you know, the fires in Amherst, just as in every place else, there were a lot of fires. You know, it was so dangerous, you know, the way everything was heated with a fire, cooked, and everything was built of wood, or if it was brick, it had a lot of wood involved in it, and this was a huge fire, and, you know, this whole huge hotel burned down, and it was rebuilt, and was very modern after it was rebuilt. It had a fancy elevator, a brass speaking tube in each room for ordering from room service, also a billiard parlor and a fine restaurant, and a saloon bar, which Maud's brother George, the anti, you know, votes for women guy, spends quite a bit of time. Then there was Page's across next door to the hotel, and the hotel gave the livery stable a lot of business, and vice versa. They were virtually a team of businesses. But it was one of half a dozen livery stables. Students were not allowed to bring horses and carriages to the college, so there was a brisk business in hired vehicles and horses. Page's was especially popular with the college boys, who had a song called Page's Horse. The class of 1889 wrote this song, and they would dash around town in their rented carriages with fast horses and sing it and just be generally a nuisance. And then along Merchants Row, which is where, I think it's where Hastings used to be, that block. Oh, these blocks always had names, so this was Merchants Row. There was a bookstore there called Spears Bookstore, also Jackson's Market, where you could buy groceries. I've added the bonnet shop, which we read, you know, when Maud and Anna went by it, and Maud was so critical of the bonnets in the bonnet shop. And Miss Beeman, the dressmaker, Miss Beeman actually did exist. I made up the bonnet shop, but I'm sure there was some bonnet shop-like place there. I gave the town of Amherst the Green Valley Confectionery and Tea Room, where a couple of crucial encounters take place. That's made up, but it was right along that strip, and there had to be a tea room. You know, everybody had a tea room. And in the book, they have very good tea and little cakes. We should have one of those, right? At the south end of the common, near the college, there was a frog pond where sometimes rather unsavory characters congregated. But then, if you go around to the east, there's Grace Church, a reassuring site, which, despite its Gothic appearance, and I'm sure many of you know this, had been there only 25 years in 1892. So it tolls several times in the course of Amity Street, and again, it's a convenient way for a writer to indicate what time of day it is without having to say it was 2 o'clock. You know, the bell tolled. You could hear the noon whistle from the hat factory on Main Street, and also fairly frequent train whistles. The trains went through the town several times a day, both north and south to New York and Vermont, and east and west to Belchertown and Boston. You could pretty much set your watch by the trains in those days. And then the town hall, moving right along, was only a couple of years old, and Anna, my Roman heroine, whose family owned a 16th century palazzo back in Rome, considered the building hideous in comments on the alarming orange bricks swagged with granite. But then she sees the Northampton Town Hall and she feels better. And then there's a couple of other places. Frank Plum's Barber Shop was a real thing, and now on Phoenix Row, which is the other side of the north side of the common, we have Amherst Books, Crazy Noodles, and Insomnia Cookies. In 1892, Amherst Books would have been quite at home, probably basically unchanged except for the books that were being sold. But it's hard to imagine what Hazel and George and Anna would have thought of something called Crazy Noodles. So that's pretty much what I want to say. It's Emily Street. I wrote it because I really love Amherst, and I was so happy to have moved here. It's a long series of reasons why I ended up in Amherst after living in New York and New Haven. But I got to know the town by doing the research and going to the library and talking to Cindy at the library. I don't know if you know her in the research room. She's fantastic if you ever need anything. I think she's still there. This is 6 years ago, but I've seen her there a couple times. But it was such a pleasure to write it and to dig up all this stuff, and about most of which I knew nothing. And so I'm delighted to take a question if anybody has them. So we can have some water.
I have a question. Is it advisable to read these two books in order?
It's not necessary, but from what I've heard from people, it's a little bit confusing if you don't. And in the front of Emily Street, I have a list of characters and what they did in the writing master.
Oh,
But again, that's confusing too, because you're always turning back to it.
Yeah.
So if you plan to read both books, I would definitely go with the earlier one
okay,
first.
okay.
And that's, that also, it's a lot of research in 1856 as opposed to 1892.
Was Page's livery, was it the same family that owned Page's Chevrolet? I don't know.
Yes.
Yeah. Because my father used to own a gas station that was a livery before it was a gas station. so it
Yes,
seems
right,
like-
right. People told me about that when I was doing the research, yeah. I love that kind of continuity, it's just amazing. And Page's was there forever, I guess. I don't know where the other livery stables were, but they must have been pretty much in the middle of town. Yes.
There's a house that we discovered on Amity Street and Sunset. It's a big yellow
Yes,
mansion.
that is being built. in
And the
course of
man who
Amity.
built the house made his fortune making straw hats.
Oh.
So that goes with your,
Yes, and there was a hat factory, maybe more than one, but there was definitely one.
There was more
And
than
it
one.
was the,
Yeah,
It was the Hills family.
it was the Hills family that
Oh.
owned this house.
Oh, that's the.
Yeah, and built this.
And the hat
house
factory
right
was,
next door.
down
Down
this
this direction.
Yeah.
These two houses were built in 1863 and 64,
Uh-huh.
and the hat factory was right down the hill
Right.
over there.
Right. Huh.
Where was the hat factory?
Just on this, down near the railroad tracks?
Yeah, down towards it, the railroad wasn't there at that point.
Near Cushman's, just like a half a block away.
It wasn't very
No,
far.
right on Main Street.
On the other side of the tracks, down the hill, the railroad was not in here when they had all this built. In fact, there was a gentleman, who had his wagon and his mules, and he brought the fronds, the palm fronds from, I guess he would have brought them from Boston, I'm not sure about that. Having come from wherever they grew the palms, whether it was in the south or
I
if they
think
even
some of
brought
them
them
came
all the
from
way from the
Panama.
islands, I don't know.
That they were called Panama hats, I think, because.
And this was a Panama hat factory, yes.
Came from Panama.
Is our picture back on the wall there?
I think
In
there
the
is.
dining room, there should be on this wall, to the right side of the door that goes in the kitchen, there is a picture, an old picture of women working in the Panama hat factory. And it was owned by the Hills family.
The house that you mentioned on the corner, that big Queen Anne
yeah,
on the
it'd be,
where Chris and Mickey used to live. But anyway, that's irrelevant. In Amity Street, that's just being built, or has just been built. so old and built in, what did you say, 18? I don't know. I think it may be 1890-ish. And Hazel, the daughter of Laura, who lives on Amherst Street, she does tutoring, and she went to Smith, and she tried to research Smith in 1892 as well. She has a student there, and so that, and a very major scene takes place in that house.
In the big yellow house.
Yeah,
Yeah.
actually on the front steps. Yes, does anybody else have a question? Or a comment, or want to correct something that I said because I'm no expert?
One thing,
Yes,
the population of Amherst, the year-round population is now like 15 or 16,000.
yes,
So
I
the
guess
rest is
with the
U.S.
students,
So
it
it's
goes up
not
into the
quite
30s, right?
You know,
Yeah.
32,000.
No, I did know that, and I meant to mention that, but yeah, and of course, the student population in 1892, UMass, the Aggie school was
I can't hear you.
UMass, which was an Aggie school, was pretty new, and one of the characters is involved with that as well. But I don't think they raised the population nearly as much, like practically doubling it, more than doubling it.
We have, I think, a little more students year-round
Yeah,
residents.
yeah,
It's, of course, increasing a lot.
right, and yes.
Was there a big suffragette movement in Amherst?
I think there was. I mean, insofar as big, it didn't really get big until after the turn of the century, but there were more stirrings of it in Amherst than there were in some other places, just because Amherst has always been, sort of politically advanced. But I don't know any facts or statistics about it, but I think one of the reasons I put it in the book was that there was a significant movement here. Yes.
Question. So when you were talking about like the muddy skirts and the difficulty that the women had with that, did you also go into like the slaves that they had?
I
Who
didn't.
probably cleaned those
Yes, no, I
muddy
didn't.
skirts? Okay.
Yeah, no, there were plenty of slaves, and certainly
Yeah,
also,
I mean, because you were talking about the,
literacy and.
you know, financially secure class.
Right, there were, I don't know about a lot of slaves, I don't know the statistics, but there were certainly slaves, and there were a lot of Irish domestic workers. The Dickinsons had Irish.
In that era?
Yeah, and, lending a sort of color to the town as well, at least the Dickinsons' servants were.
This is after the Civil War that this all takes place. So they weren't slaves.
Yeah, I don't think that there were still slaves. There were certainly some black people in the town, and they probably freed slaves, but I know that at the time when people had slaves, certainly Amherst, like so many places in New England, there was slavery. I guess that's not news, yes.
If the railroad tracks are not down here in that time, are they in the center of town?
The road,
The rail trail was a railway going east and west.
Okay.
yes, that's,
And the north and south one, it must be the same tracks, but maybe they weren't going through where the tracks are now.
I don't think there was a railway through the middle of town. I don't know
There
if there
was
were rails.
trolleys, there were
There would be
trolleys.
trolleys, right,
That's after
yeah.
your time frame.
Yeah, yes.
Yeah.
But you
The
could
rail
take a trolley to
was
Northampton.
down there or over there.
I have to say that reading that, both books, was such fun, especially Amity Street, because I grew up in town. And it's just been really fun to try to figure out where things are, exactly what you're talking about, and yeah, it was really fun.
Did you find any anachronisms or mistakes? or-
No, I didn't, but I did make me wonder, I kept thinking that the railroad track was down here, and it was quite a hike up from Amity Street down here, because you referred often to people walking toward the railroad tracks.
That's true, but people walked immense distances.
Yeah,
And thought
yeah.
really nothing of it.
Yeah,
But then there were the livery stables, so you could also take a.
take a carriage or a horse or something, yeah.
But, yeah, and it's great to have to keep all that in your head, and I think if you're researching a historical novel or a historical narrative of any kind, what you need to do is gather tons and tons of information and just sort of let it settle, and then just write the book without making it sound like
it's all research and,
Yeah.
you know, that's.
Interconnecting all of that and being accurate about it is really quite the,
Yeah,
quite the challenge.
But,
Yeah,
it was really, I enjoyed writing.
it's great, I loved it.
Oh,
Thank you. Yeah.
Okay, that sounds like a very interesting book. After that, I want to read it. Yeah, thank you so much. Were there any other questions? Comments? Quibbles? Well, it
Thank
sounds,
you.
yeah, thank you so much. That was. It's nice to hear all the little bits and pieces because it like captures your attention. You're like, oh, I want to hear this. I want to read this book. So thank you so much, Katie, for being a speaker here at the Amherst Women's Club. And it's kind of nice that we're kind of in there a little bit. Mentioned it.
I know that I would be giving a talk at that.
Yeah, no, isn't that funny how things happen that way? Sometimes you see something and you're like, someday I want to go in there, and then someday you're in there being the speaker. So it's really nice that, it's an honor to have you. You are gonna get a membership to the club,
Okay.
so that you can come to all of our events. And enjoy, you are welcome to come to our holiday festivities, and sing with me if you would like. We can, oh, don't worry. No experience necessary. No, exactly. And, we have a nice mug for you, so you can, tomorrow morning you can think about us and have a nice cup of coffee or tea. Thank you. Let me take a nice picture of you, and is it okay if we put it on the website? You can say no.
Should we have a back or maybe?
Go, you should take a picture.